Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Kayla and I release new videos every Monday about all things BPD. So if that sounds good to you, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below as well as the bell notification up top. Now, for those of you who have been following along, you would know that I have been releasing videos that talk about the different symptoms relating to BPD, and today we're talking about the 8th symptom, which is the one relating to intense anger. The DSM defines this 8th symptom as inappropriate or intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, and we often also hear the term borderline rage, which is not found within the DSM, but I do believe that when folks are referring to borderline rage, they are referring to this diagnostic criteria. Now, although anger is just one out of the 9 diagnostic criteria of BPD, this is the one that tends to get noticed the most, and right away we really do see this intense anger and emotional dysregulation as some of the key founding components of BPD. The reason being is that there is this outward acting component to anger, which is obviously more noticeable than internal turmoil and struggling to figure out who we are as people. And I do want to add this caveat though, that for the folks who have quiet BPD, it's a lot of internal anger, so self-directed anger. So we wouldn't really see the same presentation of this anger. But for the majority of folks, we do see this kind of in your face, very outward expression of anger, which is why it's noticed so evidently by others. The way that anger is also expressed in folks who have BPD is not as simple as it sounds. So there's different ways in which it can come about. There's some folks who are constantly angry, so very easily irritable, always on edge. There's others who experience anger without an apparent cause or stimuli, so they just happen to get mad kind of seemingly out of nowhere. And then we have other folks who get really intense anger, but only from an apparent trigger. So maybe this is a rejection from a loved one, and usually this has to do with interpersonal issues, so whether it's real or perceived abandonment or rejection, we see this as a trigger for this then intense anger. And I'm saying this so that you realize that the way that anger manifests in everyone is very different. Yes, there are different symptoms and you may check the box having the symptoms, but it doesn't mean that you express it in the typical way that everyone else in society expects. When thinking about anger in folks who have BPD, we see 3 defining characteristics. So that there's an intensity to the anger, that there's a lower threshold, meaning that you might get angry faster than everyone else, and that there's also an extended duration of time, so that something that may trigger someone else that maybe lasts an hour might spin you off the wheels for a full day or a couple of days. And there has been research on these 3 characteristics, and they're still not sure if it's a combination of all 3, if there's interactions. From what I have seen from others who have BPD and from my own personal experience, I can say that it's most likely a combination of the 3, because we do have this intensity that's driven from this triggering of our core content, so this fear of abandonment or rejection or being inadequate, paired with the lower threshold because we're hypersensitive, and then with the extended duration, if we don't have the skills to calm down, to regulate our nervous system, then yes, it makes sense that there's a combination of these 3 characteristics at play when we do experience this BPD anger. Anger can also be internalized or externalized, as I had already mentioned. So for folks who have quiet BPD, it's a lot of internalized anger at yourself, at others, which leads to resentment, bitterness, a lot of negative qualities, can really affect the way that you perceive yourself and your relationships. Anger also sometimes has a cyclic quality, meaning that anger can trigger more anger, which triggers more anger. And then what we see often with folks with BPD is that their anger is triggered by something, but then at the end of the cycle, they're going to be really, really angry disproportionately to what actually happened, because this anger feeds on itself and builds and builds and builds, because we don't necessarily have the skills to self-regulate our emotions, and so we get lost in the intense feelings, and that just carries us away into this sea of anger. There's 2 other things that often also happens relating to anger, and one of them is fitting a narrative to the anger. So what I mean by this is that sometimes folks who have BPD, especially when it's more of this out of nowhere anger that seems to emerge, they have all the physical sensations, right? So warmth, sweatiness, tightness in the chest, whatever anger looks like for you. And because we don't understand where this is coming from, we look around in our environment to see, okay, how can I make sense of this? And so we fit a narrative to our sensations, and we make up scenarios to help us understand or make sense of our experiences, because they're so weird to us and we don't understand why this is happening. So that's one thing that we can see happen. Another thing is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we see this a lot with folks who have BPD. So maybe you get angry at someone and then that person removes themselves, or the relationship takes a hit and they're not as close to you, and so you feel isolated. And this just proves to you that nobody likes me, I'm all alone, I have no friends, no one loves me, I'm not good enough. And so we get mad at that and we push people away, and it's just a cycle of reinforcing this narrative that we hold about ourselves. Now that we understand how complex anger is in folks with BPD, what do we do about it, right? Because the first step is developing awareness that we struggle with these things and recognizing the patterns, whether that's that we're constantly angry, or that we're triggered by specific things, or that our anger seems to emerge seemingly out of nowhere, and maybe there's some reasoning that we're not taking the time to pay attention to. So the first thing I will recommend is to do some grounding exercises. Breathing is my go-to, for the simple fact that breathing is accessible to us from the day that we are born till the day that we die. No matter where we are, we can connect to our breath. So just purposefully and intentionally slowing down our breathing, making sure that we're exhaling longer than we're inhaling to really activate the parasympathetic nervous system, can be an awesome way to ground yourself when you're feeling this intense anger. So that's one grounding technique. Something else that I often recommend to clients is focusing on your 5 senses. So finding something that you can touch, something that you can taste, something that you can smell, see. Okay, so really honing in on those 5 senses and taking a moment to really immerse yourself in the physical experiences outside of your body, so that you're not honing in on this anger. Because oftentimes when we feel very intense emotions inside, by actually doing mindfulness exercises that focus on the sensations, can make us feel like it's out of control and can actually amplify them. So we want to take ourselves outside of our bodies and focus on external sensations, right? Breathing also, yes, it's a more internal process, but we're not focusing on the tightness in our chest, right? We're just focusing on slowing down the breathing, and you can actually combine the two, right? You can slow down your breath as you're looking to external grounding things, so through your 5 senses. The second thing I will recommend, and this is really all of the DBT Distress Tolerance skills, so the accept skills, which are really focused on distracting yourself. I know that distraction typically is seen as a negative thing. However, when you're in these very intense swings of emotions, intentional distraction can actually be really beneficial. So turning your attention to things like music. So when you're feeling angry, play music that doesn't match the emotion, right? So maybe you put really upbeat music to counteract. Maybe you go for a walk, or you call a friend, or you read a book, or you do something else to distract yourself. Okay, so the accept skills. There's also the tip skill, which I have already talked about. So changing your body temperature, doing an intense exercise. So just going for sprints outside, doing push-ups, jumping jacks, paced breathing, which goes back to the first thing I recommended. The stop skill, which is to stop, take a step back, to observe, and only proceed when you're mindful and you're aware of your internal situation. I know that I'm going over these very quickly for the simple reason that I'm going to make in-depth videos for each of the distress tolerance skills. But if you are curious, you can definitely Google them. I'll put PDFs in the show notes down below for those of you who want more information right away. So just to recapitulate what I was saying. So the first thing would be doing grounding exercises. The second thing would be to really focus on those distress DBT tolerance skills. And then the third thing is just to get help or support from people who are unbiased in your life and can help you identify your blind spots. So, and I always say this, and I know I repeat myself, it's just really important to have people who can give us a different perspective that we don't have this emotional connection to, because sometimes when we have our partner or our family or our friends trying to tell us things that they're noticing in us, it can feel difficult because it feels like a criticism, it feels like a personal attack. And personally, I have found it much easier to have a therapist, so someone that is really detached from my life, call me out on things. And it's actually much easier for me to receive that criticism and feedback than it is from my partner, family, or friends, right? So finding a therapist, a coach, just someone outside of your personal life to help you navigate and cope with the difficulties that come along with having BPD. As always, I'm curious to know what has worked for you. If you have any tips or tricks or skills that have worked for you to help you deal with BPD anger, leave them in the comments down below. I know that they're not only helpful for me, but they're really helpful for everyone else that watches my videos. And I really want to build up a community of folks who have BPD or who are curious about BPD, so that we can help each other navigate the trickiness that is having this disorder. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today, and I wish you all an awesome week. I will see you next time for another episode of On the Line.